Hello everybody and welcome to SQL on the Edge. This is episode 20 and we're going to talk about Azure Data Factory mapping data flows. I am Warner Chavez, SQL Server MCM, a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and I work for Pythian. Make sure you visit us at pythian.com. So the topic for today is Azure Data Factory mapping data flows. This is a new feature in the V2 release of Azure Data Factory. For those of you that are not familiar, Azure Data Factory had a version 1.0 release that wasn't really well adopted because of the lack of features and some of the quirkiness of its architecture. But now Microsoft has really revamped the service and turned it into a full-blown ETL solution, especially with this release of this data flow functionality. The idea here is that you can do data integration with no coding, only using a very simple expression builder capability, similar to what you would do, for example, in Excel expressions. And then you would do the authoring for these data flows all inside the ADF portal, all graphically driven. And then the idea, of course, here, as you can tell from the name, it's called mapping data flows, and it is because the idea is to map different data sources. So this feature is targeted right now towards integrating data sources where the data itself is already in a not too complicated format, is already in probably in a structured format, is not really to convert or do deep cleanse of data. For that, actually, Microsoft has another product in preview called Wrangling Data Flows, which we will cover in another video. Okay, so for now, let's go straight into the Azure portal. I'm going to walk you through the graphical interface of how you can create a mapping data flow. Okay, I'm connected here now to the Azure Data Factory portal. And the first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to go here to the author side of the left-hand panel. And as you can see here, I already have one data flow. It says in preview right now, as it is in public preview. I can open it up and go take a look at it. It's called Movies Data Flow. So I am basically working here with data that is from a couple of different files that have some information in regards to some movies. So let's take a look at what this is doing. So first thing I want you to notice here is as we begin the data flow, on this side, we have the different sources that we are going to be working with, right? So I have one movies file, and then I have another file that's a movie rating. So let's say I want to integrate these two different data sources, right? And I can keep adding more. As you can see here, we have this add data source option. Now, once you have data sources in, it's very easy to work with the tool. You will notice here we have these small plus signs, which just basically means I want to add a step after what is already here. So for example, if I were to click here, you can see all the different things we can add after we have added a data source. We can see we can have a new branch of execution. We can do a join, conditional split, exists, lookups. We can see here we have some transformations that are called schema modifiers. So we can derive a column, we can only select a few columns, we can do aggregation of columns, work with surrogate keys, pivot or unpivot the data, capture a window of data, and so on. And finally, we have these row modifiers, which are basically operations that will work with some row data. So for example, we can filter it, we can sort all the rows, or we can actually alter a specific row depending on some criteria. And then of course at the very end there is the sync transformation so that we can finally output whatever it is that we are doing into some permanent storage, whatever that may be. It could be Azure SQL DB, it could be blob storage, it could be data warehouse, it could be a data lake folder, and so on, right? So for example, I'm going to show you here. If we look at the data and I go in this extract title, if I click on it, we will go into the definition of this extract step. So you can see, for example, I am trying to create a new column here on this step based on the data that I have. And what happens here is that because of the titles that come in the file, the titles already have the year data inside the title, and I want to split that year data outside into its own separate field. So you can see here where we have this expression that is a regex extract. So I want to extract that data that has the year, and I'm going to trim it from white space, and then that is going to become a new column called a short title, right? So we're taking away that year information and leaving just the title. So for example, if we have something that says Superman 1978, then we're taking out the 1978 and it's just going to say Superman. And then we're doing the same here with this tracked year. As you can see, I'm using again another regex expression so that I can take out the actual year from the title. So far, and the whole goal here of this experience is that there is no coding involved, right? All I need to do is work with these expressions, which are, like I said, very familiar for people that work with things like Excel, Power BI, and so on. You just have to create some expressions to produce the output that you want. Now, to join the two different data sources, I'm actually going to do this lookup transformation that is up here, right? And this is very simple as well. I'm going to click on it, and you can see what I'm doing is that once I extract this year and short title from that file at the top, then I can join it to these columns that were already separate columns on the right input, right? The second file. And you can add as many of these as you want to do your basically your join condition for a lookup. And again, none of this requires any coding. You can do it all here graphically on the interface. After the join is complete, if we move here, scroll further so we can see more of the transformation, then I'm just going to do a filter so that I can only grab records that actually were joined properly. And then we do a select so that I only pick a few columns. I'm not going to pick all the columns in the output. Here I deleted, so you can see here, for example, where I have these controls to delete a column or add a new column to the output. And then at the end, I just have to specify a sync. And in my case, you can see here where I said sync dataset, it says movies output is basically a new dataset that I created that just outputs whatever this data flow is doing into Azure Blob Storage. But like I said before, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be Azure Blob Storage. Notice as well something very important. At no point do I have to specify a Databricks cluster or any sort of information regarding of how this is going to execute. This is all handled under the covers by Azure Data Factory itself. Now the data flow itself is not going to execute on its own. You actually have to put it inside a pipeline. So for example, if I go up here to my pipeline, I'm going to look for the pipeline that I use to execute this particular data flow. And you can see it here, it's called data flow test. And we can see the only activity that I put inside this data flow tests is the pipeline itself. However, but you, for example, could be doing something more complex if you're moving some data around, or if you are going to be bringing it in from another service, then you perform the data flow, and then you go back into doing some more orchestration or executing, let's say, a store procedure from the Azure SQL DB side, and then finally you output into something else, and that is the end of your pipeline. So that's all to mean that basically the data flow just becomes another step that you can compose into your larger pipeline, okay? And then the other part, of course, is the monitoring instrumentation piece of this. So I've already executed my data flow. So I'm just going to go here and we're going to change this. It says last 24 hours. So let's say, for example, last week. And you can see here I have this data flow test execution that succeeded. And then the cool thing about it is, well, I can rerun it, of course. You can see we have a couple of actions right here. But very importantly, if you just want to analyze a run after it already happened, you do have here this option that says view activity runs. So if I click on it, and you can actually see at the bottom here where it says view the data flow details, right? So I'm going to click on it. And then you can see here is basically a replay of what happened during your data flow, right? So you can click on a particular operation, for example, the extract title. And you can see on this side, very interesting, you can see how many rows passed through that particular step, if it was partitioned or not. In case you have a really big input, you might want to partition it over a particular value, for example, so that you can process it in parallel. In my case, it's pretty small file, so I didn't need to do that. And you can see how long it took as well, right? 142 milliseconds to do this particular piece. You can see the lookup as well. And then at the end, we can keep going here. You can go to the sync, and you can see here at the very end how many were the rows that made it all the way to our final output, and you get here the details as well of how this was mapped, if they were calculated, and so on, right? So you can see if a particular field came from an actual data source directly or if it was calculated as part of the transformation. And the same you can see here for all the different steps that we took. We have all this other metadata stored that we can then use if we want to optimize the performance of our particular data flow. Okay, so I hope you got a good overview of the interface of the mapping data flows and the capabilities and the power that it has. It's a very intuitive GUI, so if you're used to some of the other ETL tools such as NiFi, SSIS, Data Stage, and so on, then you will be very familiar with this type of experience where you simply connect inputs, outputs, perform transformations, and so on. There is no actual coding developer experience. All you'll have to do is learn that expression language that I showed on the demo as well. And like I said before, it's very similar to what you would find in Excel or Power BI or SSIS Tabular and so on. It supports the same sources and the same sinks as ADF. So everything that you could do up until now with ADF pipelines, you can integrate as well into the ADF mapping data flows. And something that is very nice and very powerful is the seamless use of Databricks, right? So under the covers, these transformations are happening with Databricks, but as you saw on the demo, I don't really need to manage or provision or do anything myself in regards to Databricks. Microsoft is managing all this for you behind the scenes, which is very nice and very powerful. And then last, the full experience is integrated from authoring to running to monitoring what happened during the execution of the mapping data flow. It's all there in the portal. As I showed there, after the run is done, you can go and review what happened, where time was spent, how many rows were moved, and so on. So you have a one-stop shop experience there with nice instrumentation as well. So I hope you have gotten a good overview of mapping data flows. I've piqued your curiosity and you're going to want to try them next time you're working with some ETL transformations in Azure. Until next time, thanks for watching.